question and answer session with David. It has come to my attention that we have a candidate for U.S. Senate in our midst. Peace Action Maine cannot endorse. We are not endorsing, but I think this is a good opportunity for Shenna Bellows to share with those of us who are very concerned with peace where she stands on peace issues. I'll then say that questions can come in for both, if she's willing, for both Shenna and David about peace issues. I don't want this to be an opportunity to quiz Shenna about the whole range of her issues, but since she's here, and I'm not going to let her get away, I hope that we'll give her a chance to convince us who are going to be voting independently why we should be supporting her for U.S. Senate.
There's not a room microphone, but there's a recording microphone.
Excellent. Well, thank you. It's such an honor to meet you. So I'm going to start with a story. My dad was a no nukes activist when I was a kid. He was a peace activist, and he went to the Rotary Club to debate nuclear weapons policy. And I was a precocious reader. I grew up in Hancock, Maine without electricity or running water, and I read everything I could find, including the pamphlets and materials about nuclear war that my dad had for traveling to local fairs and things. And so I developed a nightmare about nuclear war, and I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I'd go downstairs, and I'd say, "Dad, you know, are we going to have a nuclear war?" And he'd say, "Not tonight, honey." I'd go back upstairs, and I'd fall asleep. And I share this because I have been dreaming of a nuclear-free world, a world without war, since I was a child. And I think that this vision of world peace is extraordinarily important. That when you look at the consequences of war on the environment, on human rights, that they are dramatic, and your research is impressive and inspiring and gives us hope. So I recently, this week, received the endorsement of one group, the Council for a Livable World, because of my policies on international peace. I think that the way to lasting global security is diplomacy and peace work. So that's where I come from. That's my belief. And it's a privilege to listen to your talk and to be here with you this evening.
You can stay if you want to. Do you want to take questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, questions? For either one? Beth?
Yeah, I have a question for both of you. I'd be interested in how you both might respond to it. I philosophically agree with everything that David said, but it seems to me the major sort of obstacle is how we convert from a war economy to a peace economy. So many jobs in this country are dependent on the war machine, on weaponry. Even in Bath, as we all know, but it's worth repeating, the community was really panicked at the thought they would lose the Bath Ironworks. So how do we begin to make that conversion and not put so many people out of work and somehow find a way to move the economy towards a peace economy?
You want to go first?
I'll go after you.
You know, there used to be routinely introduced in Congress a bill to create a national commission to work on conversion, the way the state of Connecticut has recently done this past year. And it really looked likely to pass just before President Kennedy was killed. And it looked like there was going to be a peace dividend and a conversion effort back when the Soviet Union collapsed. And a friend of ours named Newt Gingrich, a congressman from Lockheed Martin, led the charge against that. And so there have been these movements that have gained momentum, and then there's been something that stopped it in its tracks. And it's been the money and the influence of the war profiteers in Washington. So I would love for there to be a candidate for office in Washington who wanted to advance that process. I would remain under the impression that at this moment we're more likely to advance it locally and at the state level. You can get in touch with Miriam Pemberton at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, who can tell you all about the federal grants that are available for cities and counties to work on conversion, to work on, in light of the overhyped but much wished for diminishment in military spending. There are grants available to help localities handle that crisis. And so you can go to your city council members or whatever local government and say, here is free money. I would like to bring you a pile of free money from the federal government. That's usually not what they hear from people, you know, and here's what it's for. It's for working on converting economically to industries that are economically beneficial, give people better jobs, better paying jobs, and jobs they can feel better about, and not go home with this incredible guilt that a lot of people actually do. And so I would say look to what Connecticut is doing. Peace Action, among other groups, very much involved there and in similar efforts in Maryland and several other states, and see if we can't advance the topic at the federal level. Maybe once a half dozen states are really moving on it. But there is more than enough money to be gained in the process to retrain and retool, and not a single person has to be hurt economically.
I would just echo, I think that's extraordinarily important. My brother is a bridge engineer, and he tells me that a majority of bridges in this country are in disrepair and deficient. And you look at the railroads and the recent environmental catastrophes, there's an extraordinary amount of infrastructure building we could do in our railroads and our bridges, and in the economy of the future, the clean energy economy. Maine could be a leader, for example, in solar and wind and conservation. And so I think that conversion is incredibly exciting. And I think it's not a question of spend more or cut more, it's how you spend these federal dollars that is so important. And spending it, investing in jobs for the future is incredibly important.
Yes? You want to go next?
I think we need to find a way to communicate to the people who are here tonight. I got a survey from a Democratic senator that I gave some money to when she ran for office. Surveyed the 10 important issues. None of them was the environment, militarism, empire, the inequality of the economy, or immigration. Those were not mentioned. They own Congress, they own the White House, they own the media. So you have things like Moral Mondays in North Carolina. This is a sort of tactic we have to employ to bring together the various issues and groups together in one coalition. And we have to find a way to communicate beyond meetings like this.
You want it?
Sure. Well, I think what I see is a video camera, and I see some phones and cameras taking pictures, and I think that their grassroots media is extraordinarily important. And we are so lucky to have the power of social media and blogs where we can freely share information. I mean, Moral Monday didn't get barely any traditional media coverage. We know about it because activists on the ground shared it through grassroots media. So we need to build community both together in person, but also together online, and spread the word that way through our circles of relational organizing, really. And we need to stand up and continue to protest publicly, even when we're not heard at first. Because the people working together, we saw through the Occupy movement, can make a difference, can be heard, but too often we're silenced.
I would just add that we shouldn't overestimate how bad things are. We shouldn't underestimate the extent to which we have been reaching people, including in the past decade or so, of anti-war activism, because the public is moving in our direction. The public turned against the wars on Iraq and Afghanistan about a year and a half into each one of them, and said this was not turned against in the sense of end it now because that's against the troops and you must support the troops and all of that sort of twisted logic, but started saying this was wrong to begin. This was a mistake. We shouldn't have done it. And after years of that sort of understanding, we began to build a public understanding that we shouldn't start another one and then 2 years later say we shouldn't have done it. So the public was against Libya, was never asked, and neither was Congress. The public has been against starting a war in Iran every time they've brought it up. Last September, everybody thought those missiles were going into Syria. Wall Street put Raytheon stock through the roof. Both political parties were for it. The president was doing everything in his power to get those missiles into Syria, telling us to watch YouTubes of kids suffering, and we're for those kids suffering or we're for his missiles. I mean, that's not a half-hearted sell. And they didn't go. They didn't go primarily because of public pressure. We run from that understanding. No, Raytheon didn't want to make any money that week. No, it was the Russians proposing an alternative, as if the Russians hadn't already been proposing an alternative. No, we have to recognize that public pressure stopped AIPAC last week, that this sanctions bill for Iran, because the public didn't see it as an alternative to war, but as a step into war, which is how they should see it, was stopped for the moment. They'll keep pushing it, and we'll keep pushing back. But we are actually moving public opinion. When this man was freed yesterday from a prison in Pakistan where he was being tortured for the past few days because he was speaking out against drones and going to testify about a U.S. missile from a drone that killed his son and his brother, he was freed because of us yelling and screaming that he needed to be freed and that we knew that the White House was in on it. Just as the reporter in Yemen who reported on the missile strikes in Yemen was locked up because President Obama told the president of Yemen to lock him up. People are on to this. And Chelsea Manning and others who have been revealing secrets get a lot of credit for that world understanding and for U.S. understanding of what's happening. And potential whistleblowers and past whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning have learned from our communications, our conversation, primarily outside of the corporate media. So it's not completely hopeless. In fact, this country, they're beginning to talk about their fear of another Vietnam syndrome. That this illness of resistance to stupid, senseless, horrible, murderous wars. It's an illness. They're talking about us falling victim to that illness again, which scares them. They're scared of this storm probably because it's named Pax. They are horrified of peace. It's a specter that haunts them, but we're not, and our neighbors are not. Our fellow citizens and residents of this country are against fairness. They're against treating the rest of the world as if it's equal to us, but they're not in favor of wars. And we are moving things very gradually in the right direction. Yes, do you want to call on people? Okay. Down here and then up there?
There were two. One was a comment about the nature of human nature, and once watching a few years ago, maybe it was a nature special or something, that if humans had discovered the bonobos, who were located in one very finite area of Africa, versus the chimpanzees, who were scattered around, our concept of human nature would be very different. That's just one point. I thought, aha. The other is something that I have long learned, is that one does not necessarily argue logically a person out of a position they never entered logically. So that we have to, I know I have to try and identify, other than just with the cognitive thought processes, but what is the primary fear that underlies the strong emotional reactivity to whatever is going on. And that I think we need to operate at that level. And too often we just scream out the facts and ignore the fact that people aren't hearing them, because that's not how they processed what they took in and valued in the first place. It's a non-rational hold, which can hold us as well as those who are of a non-liberal progressive bent.
Well, two very good questions. Do you want to take either?
The bonobos was just an observation.
Well, I want to say something about it, but...
I'll just say I agree with you that, and one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is storytelling and how we tell our truths through story, because I think that's a way to connect more deeply than fact sometimes. And then how we question the stories we tell ourselves as well, because to really speak truth and to find truth, we need to question what we believe to be true as well. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that we need to connect on both levels. It can't just be logic and facts, although I think in this area, the logic and the facts support the premise that we need to work toward peace, that war is a costly proposition.
To put them out, but don't think it's going to convince people
Right.
who weren't argued into it that way.
Yeah, I agree with both of your comments, and I think there's actually not any evidence that Homo sapiens and either bonobos or chimpanzees share these sorts of traits with a common ancestor. I mean, it's not relevant. If telling people how aggression was manufactured in the chimpanzees through human interference, as I think it was, and if telling people how bonobos behave it helps them, fine. But I don't think, and a lot of scientists don't think it's actually relevant. But I do think that understanding that people are not rational robots who deal in pure logic is very important. Certainly, the marketers of wars understand it quite clearly. You know, when you show there have been studies done where you take people who still believe in the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and you show them evidence that this was a bunch of lies, they tend to believe it more strongly, not less strongly, after having been shown the evidence. So there becomes this emotional attachment and identification with a position that defies logic. And certainly the fear-mongering around 9/11 that went on, that's gone on ever since by a couple of White Houses and several Congresses, is completely irrational. Many more people die in this country from many other causes, from horrible diets to bad products to unsafe workplaces to guns. Yes, if we wanted, and of course have died in the process of supposedly responding to 9/11, then died on 9/11. So if we wanted to rank fears rationally, the fear of the evil foreigner who's coming to get us would rank rather low. But because of the kind of fear it is, and because of our evolution, it carries more weight with people. And so we have to recognize that people are not just under the misunderstanding that the wars are doing good. They also are scared for their lives and scared for their children's lives, and that people don't think straight when they're scared. So we have to know that that's what we're up against.
Including us. I mean me, including me.
Well, we all get scared. We have to try not to. There was some.
I think you were next.
Yeah, in the course of some of your comments, you reminded me of a question I often ask. We are motivated to be afraid after September 11th. We are motivated to think that Al-Qaeda is everywhere trying to get us, and I spin off on a lot of commentary. Who is they?
Who wants us to be afraid? Is that the question?
Well, who is the they that manipulates us so well? How would you define that?
Well, I think when you look at your average employee of the U.S. federal government, many of them have the best intentions in the world, and many of them try very hard to imagine that their agency or their department or the U.S. government has the best intentions in the world. And sometimes people lose the ability to think that that's really what their superiors are up to. And in a tiny fraction of those cases, they become whistleblowers. But I think it's important to understand that those at the top, the president, the top senators, I'm sorry, there are good senators, the Secretary of so-called Defense, the Secretary of State, these are not people with good intentions. You know, we like to think that because crazy right-wingers call the government bad, we must call the government good. But the government is not your friend. The government is not your ally. Governments function better when people, and as well as journalists, treat it in an antagonistic fashion, hold it to account. We're so ready to doubt the government when they launch crazy new healthcare schemes, or the EPA has a new policy, or there's a new IRS policy or they're bailing out the banks. We're so ready to denounce their corruption and their lies. But when it comes to war and foreign policy, I don't mean the people in this room, but many people are ready to swallow it, or to at least hope that it's well-intended if misguided. Well, it's not well-intended. When you spy on and sabotage a conference in Copenhagen to prevent any serious action on global warming, it's not well-intended. When you try to ram through every abuse across every issue area with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it's not well-intended. When you invent lies about chemical weapons attacks in Syria, or threats to human life in Benghazi, or stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction in Baghdad, it is not well-intended. It is lies to justify policies that would not be accepted on their merits. And people participate to various degrees. When the television networks employ Pentagon employees, former generals on the Pentagon payroll, getting their talking points from the Pentagon, and pretend they are independent observers and commentators, that's not well-intended. It's evil. It's vicious. And when we imagine that all of this is needed, that all of these abuses of our rights and the tapping of our telephones and emails and phone calls and metadata is all maybe a little bit overblown, but it's well intended because they need to confront evildoers. No, they are evildoers. They're doing evil. And they are going to do us all in if we don't take control. There's not one person. It's not as if Dick Cheney fooled everybody else and it's all his fault. People become complicit to varying degrees, right? Down to the slightest degree. And that includes all of us. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you.
Particularly for, oh dear, I'm blocking on you.
Shanna Bellows.
I know your interest in civil rights and protection of them. This is vital. The only law that we can say we have is the Constitution, and we know that it's being overrun and ignored. Considering, excuse me, the topic for tonight, the whole thing of war, would you please address some of the problems that we're facing with our civil rights because of the push of the government, of the corporations toward war, and ordinary citizens' resistance to wanting this sort of thing?
The USA Patriot Act was passed just 45 days after September 11th, and it's hundreds of pages long. And we have seen subsequently a huge abuse of power with the National Security Agency, the NSA, spying on millions of Americans, email and telephone communications, and location. And that, I think, has undermined our individual liberties when we are not free to communicate with one another, free from surveillance. It's undermined our individual liberties, and it's also undermined community trust in government and one another. So I think that is, but also looking at policies of torture and detention and the drone killing program, I think those have arisen and are a huge assault on our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And you're right, those are documents that bind us across ideology and background as a country. Those are values that we aspire to, and we've never fulfilled the promise of the Constitution and Bill of Rights perfectly. But in the last decade, we have seen an erosion of civil liberties that is very concerning. And concerning because, for example, the USA Patriot Act has sunset provisions. So Congress has an opportunity to revisit it every few years. And time again, Congress has chosen to authorize and expand it, and to do worse things, like the FISA Amendments Act of 2008, which really expanded surveillance powers of the government, or the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which expands powers of indefinite detention. So I think it's a huge reason why I'm running, is to restore our constitutional freedoms, to restore the protections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And it's a clear difference between my opponent, Susan Collins, and I. She's voted time and time again to renew the Patriot Act. She's voted for NSA spying. She's defended the NSA surveillance program. She's sponsoring that Iran sanctions bill, which I think is extraordinarily dangerous and brings us closer to war. So there is a struggle going on, and I was remembering the ACLU. I was head of the American Civil Liberties Union of Maine for almost 9 years. We defended a small group of protesters who tried to march in the streets in Augusta when the war began, and were stopped. They were told they could march on the sidewalks only. We ended up being successful in court, but it took a couple of years, and that was the point, right? Was to stop those marches, to stop those early protests, to prevent public awareness. But to think, though, about the popular recognition that it was a mistake to go to war, that those peace activists were correct, is really heartening to me. So I do have hope that we can restore our civil liberties. I do have hope that we can repeal these unjust laws. It's going to require new energy and new vision and a willingness to work in different ways to stand up against these forces that are in alignment from both parties, really promoting the erosion of civil liberties and promoting the surveillance state.
I think I saw Gary's hand next.
Question for David. The composition of our society is changing, it always is. Old people are dying off, younger people are coming into positions of interest and authority and so forth. So the nature of who we are is changing. And in terms of what you want to accomplish with World Beyond War, are you finding that the young people who are becoming more of a prominent factor in decision-making in this country are more supportive of what you want to do, less supportive, more of a challenge? If they are different, how will that impact how you plan your strategy to accomplish what you want to do?
Well, I can't give you a thorough scientific survey of the country on that question. I don't have the information. I can give you my immediate impressions and my impressions of just the very initial stages of starting this global coalition that has had some thousands of people sign on from 53 countries so far, and some hundreds of organizations. And I would say that young people are smarter about Israel. Young people are smarter about the environment. Young people are more ready for radical change, even if it's actually conservative in terms of going back to previous understandings and resisting radical changes in the wrong direction. But I would say in terms of peace activism, I've yet to be at very many peace events, if any, ever, anywhere in the country, in this country, that weren't far too old and far too white. And part of the reason why I want to be involved in launching a broader, and I hope much bigger and better funded and better resourced peace movement is to be able to pay organizers to actively go out and engage with communities, with poor communities and communities of color and young people. And I think young people have managed to get a decent understanding of the environmental crisis in many cases. Not enough, just like with older people. But I think, I talk to college groups and high school groups and other random samplings of younger people, and they don't think war is illegal. They don't think it should be illegal. They don't think it can be abolished. They don't think it should be abolished. All of these myths are at least as far advanced in the heads of our young folks as they are in the minds of our older folks. And why wouldn't they be growing up in this society with this culture where we spend more on recruiting a person into the military than we spend on putting a person in prison, which is more than we spend on educating somebody. You know, these are our priorities. I've happened to be asked several times in recent days, how did you become a peace activist? How did you start doing this? I think in some cases interviews with newspapers here in Portland, and I've started saying, you know, if there had been recruitment posters for peace activists, I would have become a peace activist right away, but it never occurred to me. I had no idea you could, you know, so I had to stumble into it years later. But we advocate war in all of our games and television programs and movies and throughout our culture and in our schools, and that has to stop. Because you can't expect miracles from young people. I mean, maybe you can, and maybe the next big burst from the Occupy movement, which is still with us, will become seen as a miracle in retrospect. But young people are growing up in a horrible culture in terms of getting a good understanding of the place that war should have. You know, there are things like rape and slavery and child abuse where we don't try to distinguish the good from the bad. You know, it's just absolutely perverse, but that's what we do with the worst thing we have, war. We try to Geneva Conventionize it, civilize it, Samantha Powerize it into a civilized form of foreign policy, and it can't be done.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jenna, you were referring to your opponent, and so I'm wondering if you know if you'll be able to debate her, and if so, if you would bring up the issue about the Iran sanctions bill, which I feel is like criminal, and so it'd be nice if she were confronted with that.
I look forward to the debates, and I hope that there are many, and groups that are involved with organizing debates can invite us, and I will go anywhere in the state to engage in these conversations. And I think that you're absolutely right. We cannot afford another war. We cannot afford war with Iran. And the Iran sanctions bill is so dangerous. It brings us, it's brinksmanship, and it undermines the negotiations. I'm very concerned about it. It's a clear policy difference. It's very relevant.
Before I give you a second question, I want to ask a question so I didn't see other hands. Jenna, there's two phrases, peace through strength, strength through peace. Do you believe that we should be pursuing both of those, one of them in particular, or neither?
I would say strength through peace, because I think peace builds lasting security. So in order to be a truly secure world, we need to advance peace everywhere.
Bill?
Debates. Unfortunately, in Maine, they tend to have 2 or 3 debates, all very close to the election, in 1 week. So you need to get more people to want to organize debates. I want to make an observation about how far the government is ready to go to squelch dissent. For 50 years, we've had the Plowshares movement engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience against nuclear weapons. The present case in Knoxville, 3 elderly folk, one of them is an 84-year-old nun, have been convicted at the government's determination of sabotage for going into a nuclear facility which was improperly protected and pounding on something. They've been convicted of sabotage. They could get 20 years. They're determined to silence that kind of dissent, at any kind of dissent. That was a choice of the government. They've never charged sabotage before, but they're doing it now. More whistleblowers have been pursued by the government in the last 5 years than in the history of the country.
You're correct. And Daniel Ellsberg wrote a really wonderful piece in the Washington Post. He said that what he did with the Pentagon Papers wouldn't be possible today, that he wouldn't have been able to speak out publicly. He wouldn't have been able to get bail and then go on a speaking tour and make his case to the American public. So he wrote that what Edward Snowden did in fleeing the country was what he had to do, given the very concerning state of our whistleblower laws and the lack of whistleblower protections. And what you're talking about, criminalizing dissent, is happening. And it's very concerning. And Congress could stop it. Congress could place checks and balances on the executive branch. But Congress has declined. They've abdicated their oversight authority. And if anything, Congress has expanded executive authority through passage of measures like the USA Patriot Act. It's a big reason why I'm running, because we can do one of two things. You know, we can go to the woods and not get involved, or we can continue to advocate and continue to try to change our laws and our systems.
No one in the Washington press corps will ask Barack Obama why he said he would support whistleblowers and is going after whistleblowers as nobody has before, just as no one has ever asked any president a tough question like that that's going to really embarrass them, because they will never be allowed to ask another question.
I think that you definitely see traditional media complicity with the status quo at all levels. And I'm heartened to see some new media ventures. For example, Glenn Greenwald and a group of fellow journalists are starting a new media venture to try to expand information to the American public. But you're right, there's been a media concentration, a consolidation of corporate power, and a complicity because people are afraid to be denied access. They're afraid to ask tough questions or write challenging or difficult stories. And so too often what you see are the press releases and the sound bites that are issued by incumbents at all levels.
You know, these three heroes who are facing sentencing for this action down in Tennessee on nuclear weaponry, we have a petition to the judge at a website I work for called rootsaction.org, and have collected tens of thousands of signatures and comments and printed it out and given it to the lawyer who's taken it to the judge, who is well aware that there is widespread support for these people, and that what they are doing is not going to be without positive consequences, regardless of how the sentencing comes out. But now that there's been this delay, there is a need to contact that judge in every way possible. We also, in the last week, have had protesters of drone killing convicted in Washington, in New York State, and in California. 3 trials happening at once. People convicted of trespassing for opposing the crime of murder happening within a military base. Peaceful, committed, nonviolent demonstrators holding up signs on a sidewalk issued a restraining order to protect a man they've never heard of or met and couldn't recognize if he stepped in front of them, who commands a military base outside of Syracuse, New York, needs police protection from these nonviolent peace activists, and they face serious penalties if they violate the restraining order, and they don't know how to not violate it because they don't know who the guy is. This is having an impact. This resistance to drone murders is creating an awareness, huge news coverage locally of these actions that is blacked out, whited out in the national press corps. There is understanding being built across this country where these protests are happening at base after base, and these people need our support and encouragement. I like the strength, peace, strength question, but I like specific questions. Could I ask a question of the candidate? Would you move to repeal either or both of the authorizations to use military force from 01 and 03, and would you move to reduce military spending?
Yes and yes.
How much?
That I can't answer. I don't have enough information to tell you exactly how much, but I do think, we're talking about nuclear weapons. I think it's extraordinarily, we're at we're at a tipping point. We can either abandon some of the outdated nuclear technologies that are falling into disrepair, and we can retire those weapons that are no longer useful or needed, or move to the next level. And in the most recent budget, unfortunately, Congress is moving to expand investment in nuclear weapons that the military wasn't even asking for. So I know, for example, there was shoot, I'm going to blank on the exact model, but there was a particular bomber that was $51 billion that the Defense Department didn't ask for, but Congress authorized. So I think that we can save billions and invest in infrastructure, invest in our communities, invest in education and job creation here at home.
I love the answer. The only thing I would object to is the idea that the other weapons are useful and needed.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And it needs to be addressed, and not in a judgmental way, but I think in a realistic way, and that is the gender issue. We've had 7,000 years of patriarchy in this culture, and it's not all men, but the men who are hungry for power and greedy for that, and who seem to have a radical disconnect with a larger context of life, have been in control. And if we look at how this nation is so violent, I mean, it was conceived, at least, what we have had to offer because of the deep misogyny toward women has squelched so many of our gifts to help really birth a world of peace in partnership with the men who wish to do that.
I have two thoughts. One, I think there's one great organization in Maine that's working on helping boys develop a different and better idea of what it means to be a boy and be a man, and that's Boys to Men,
Yeah,
which is a great organization. And I just came from Emerge Maine, which is an organization that trains women to run for office, and I spoke at their graduation, and I related a story. My best friend from college was telling her daughter, her 6-year-old daughter, about me and how I was running for U.S. Senate, and showed her a picture of me. And I met her daughter before, but showed her a picture of my opponent, Susan Collins, and her daughter took a moment and asked a question which really touched my heart and I think leads us to where we want to be, and said, "Do you have to be a woman to be a U.S. Senator?" Which is a really wonderful view from the eyes of a 6-year-old. And I think that vision of elevating women in leadership is really important. It's important for peace. It's important for all of our issues. We need to get to a place of parity. And I think we will. I think that we're moving toward that. I think we're raising a new generation of feminists. I think that's one area where young people are doing really well, is with feminism.
And I think there's some improvement with young people in terms of the idea of what it takes to be a macho man in our society, but there's a long way to go. We still have this idea of violence and toughness as what it takes to be a man. In the 19th century, William James used to say we needed a moral alternative to war. We needed something that wasn't war, but allowed courage and bravery and sacrifice and excitement and adrenaline. I don't think they used that term, but
that had the same amount of sex appeal.
Right. Well, Gandhi invented it. We don't need to invent it anymore. You know, people in Tahrir Square were not lacking for excitement and courage and sacrifice. You find that in nonviolence without the lasting traumatic side effects that you find in war. So we have the alternative for war, but we don't have it in our culture. We don't teach our boys that if you want to be a man, you should resist violence, you should respect people, you should cooperate, that's what's manly. So we have to work on that. And yet I think it's worth understanding that since war stopped being hand-to-hand, women have been absolutely as capable of taking part in war as men, and have done so quite easily and readily, except for the resistance of the macho culture of the men in the military. And that there is a real danger facing us right now of people saying, we elected a black man, and that was a good idea, but didn't quite work, something went wrong somewhere, let's pick a different demographic. Let's give all power in the universe to a woman, and she'll save us. And I think, you know, that's the wrong approach. The right approach is the Occupy movement didn't quite work yet. let's build it bigger and better. Because you don't fix things by electing the right messiah, or much less, you know, an all-powerful leader because of demographic characteristics, rather than because of their personal principles and the content of their character, which, you know, we're going to have a hard time getting people to pay attention to, I'm very, very afraid, a year or so from now.
Gary?
I've got a question for Shana. Position yourself in a situation, you've just won the election for senator in the state of Maine, or you won the election a couple of months ago. You are now serving, and there's a launching at Bath Iron Works of a Aegis destroyer, and as normally happens, the full congressional delegation is given the phone call to come and, quote, celebrate, unquote, the launch of this destroyer, and our congressional delegation has always been unified in doing so, so we expect you all to be there. What would you accept or not, and could you say what your response would be in making your acceptance or non-acceptance decision?
I think if we're going to change the world, we need to engage everywhere that we can, and we need to engage with people with whom we disagree, and we need to talk to the people who are most directly affected in every sector and geography about these issues. So we are not going to be successful in achieving conversion unless we can convince the folks, the workers at Bath Iron Works, that that is the direction, that that's the future of the economy. So I do think it's really important to engage. I can't think of an invitation anywhere that I would not accept. I've made that clear, that I would debate anywhere, that I go to any group to talk about who I am and what I represent and why I'm running. But I will continue to say what I've said here tonight to people at BIW. And I may say things on the campaign trail that you may disagree with at some times. I don't think any two people ever agree 100% of the time. But you'll always know where I stand, and I'll always speak honestly about my point of view. So that's what I would say.
So I would take that as saying you would.
I would go.
You would go.
But I would also be honest about what I see as the future economy and where I think we need to go in terms of international peace. So.
And let us not forget that we christen those ships as they are launched.
Mm-hmm.
We christen them.
We didn't christen the last one.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.